Hi, good morning. I'm so excited to work with you. You excited to be a homeowner?
Yeah, I'm excited to work with you too. And yes, we're definitely ready to be homeowners.
All right, so tell me what you're in the market for.
Yeah, so we're looking for a 4-bed, 2 or 3 bath, and a big yard and maybe a pool.
Okay. So what's your target budget?
We're looking to spend around $250,000. Max I can do is $300,000, but that's a real stretch for us.
No, so really, what's your budget?
No, that is our budget.
Oh, okay. And remind me of the specs you're looking for?
4-bed, 3 bath, and a pool? Hello? If you clicked on this video, then you've probably experienced something similar. House prices have risen absurdly high over the last 2 years, and now mortgage interest rates are roughly twice as high from their low in January 2021, making it so much more difficult for many of us to achieve the American dream of buying a home. I was fortunate enough to purchase my home last year in August. I bought it for $285,000 with a 10% down payment. I know that seems ridiculously cheap right now, but funnily enough, I thought house prices were incredibly high back then, which is kind of a joke seeing where prices are at today. I was also lucky because I was able to lock in a 30-year fixed mortgage interest rate of 2.75% at the time when rates were close to their record lows. In total, my housing payment came in at about $1,750 a month, excluding utilities. But to put how crazy the housing market has gotten into perspective, I recently did some housing calculations on how much my housing cost would be if I bought my house today instead of last year in August. If I had waited just 10 months later, my house would have cost around $53,000 more than what I paid. And with this price increase combined with the dramatically higher mortgage rates of today, my monthly housing payment would have been close to $2,700. So that's an increase of nearly $1,000 a month if I were to have just waited another 10 months before buying my home. Clearly, there is a housing affordability issue today. And many of you might be thinking that because house prices have risen so fast in the last few years, surely they're going to come down at some point in the future. So should I hold out from buying a house until prices come down? Or do I just pull the trigger and buy a house now in case that doesn't happen? It's a really valid concern to have. And before we answer that question, it's important to first understand the factors that caused house prices to surge and become so unaffordable. One of the biggest drivers of house price appreciation over the last few years has been the lack of housing inventory on the market. Housing inventory is another way of saying how many homes there are for sale on the market currently, and it's typically measured in months. For example, if there's 1 month of housing inventory, then that means that if no new homes were to come on the market, all of the homes that are currently for sale would be bought within 1 month. 6 months of housing inventory is typically considered a neutral market, in which the demand to buy homes and the supply of homes for sale are balanced. There has been very low housing inventory for quite some time now. In 2020, housing inventory was just 3 months, and in 2021, it was even lower at 2.2 months. So currently, we are short millions of homes. And since housing prices are determined by supply and demand, having very little housing supply combined with a large amount of prospective buyers eager to move into houses due to remote work increasing in popularity, buyers in the last few years have had to compete against each other for the very few homes for sale on the market right now, which has bid up house prices higher and higher. The second reason for house prices increasing is due to a shortage of construction workers and material costs going up in price. Lumber prices literally tripled in 1 year, and these higher costs of building get passed on to home buyers in the form of higher prices. Moving on to the third reason for surging home values, historically low interest rates. Up until the last few months, mortgage interest rates have been incredibly low. You might be thinking, how exactly do low interest rates cause house prices to go up? Well, interest rates and prices are inversely correlated. When mortgage rates are low, you don't have to pay as much in monthly interest payments towards your home. For example, let's say you've looked at your budget and you have worked out that you can afford to spend a maximum of $1,000 on your mortgage payment. You then go to a mortgage calculator and you work out that at a 4% interest rate, you can afford to buy a home that costs $250,000. But then the Federal Reserve decides to lower interest rates and mortgage rates drop as a result to 3%. If you then run the same calculation, you can now afford a home that costs $271,000. But if this is true for you, then it's true for everyone else. So now everyone can afford to spend a little more on buying a house. So this makes it possible for many people to afford a house that they previously couldn't before, driving up competition between buyers and bidding up home prices. But it's these incredibly low interest rates combined with the Federal Reserve printing more money in 1 year than at any other time in history that has caused the high inflation problem we're experiencing today. So a few months ago, the Fed decided decided that inflation was getting out of control and that they should probably do something about it. So they utilized really the only method they have to try and decrease inflation, which is to raise interest rates. So far this year, they've raised interest rates on 2 separate occasions, once in March and then one more time earlier in May, which has now caused mortgage rates to increase dramatically. Which brings us to where the housing market is at today, where we have sky-high housing prices still, but now we also have high mortgage rates, which has increased the monthly cost of owning a home significantly. But something that might have crossed your mind earlier when I was talking about how low interest rates contributed to house prices rising is that surely the inverse is also true, right? Surely if mortgage rates are higher now, with the potential of increasing even more in the future, then prices have to come down, right? Well, not necessarily. And that's because house prices are determined by supply and demand. And even though rising interest rates lower demand, there are many other factors that are affecting the supply and demand dynamic. Here are some of the arguments many housing experts have in favor of prices continuing to rise in 2022. The first is low inventory. Like I said before, a balanced housing market has roughly 6 months of housing inventory available. The latest data from the National Association of Realtors shows that there was only 2.2 months of housing supply last month in April. So even though housing inventory has increased slightly from its low of 1.5 months in January 2022, it's still very low with only 2.2 months supply. Experts believe that housing supply would need to be at over 6 months to see a buyer's market again, aka supply can't keep up with demand even now. The second argument for house prices continuing to rise this year is that borrowers are less likely to default on their mortgages than they were when the housing market crashed back in 2008. One of the main reasons for the housing crisis of 2008 was due to mortgages being given to non-credit-worthy borrowers, many of whom didn't even have a legitimate proof of income, whereas today's lending standards are much stricter, so borrowers today are less likely to default on their mortgage. And the last big reason why house prices may keep rising is due to inflation. Despite the Fed's efforts to taper inflation, it's still very high, and money has been flowing freely over the last 2 years, so real estate may continue to go up in price along with everything else. But for every expert that has an opinion on something, there's always another expert that has a totally opposite opinion. So here are 3 reasons why some housing experts think house prices will fall, or at least begin to flatten out later this year. The first reason is the potential of more interest rate hikes coming this year. Some experts believe that the Fed will raise interest rates by a total of 3% this year, which will result in even higher mortgage rates than what we're seeing right now. And if that happens, even less people will be able to afford to buy a house, resulting in less demand for housing, causing house prices to soften. It's also possible that house prices might already be softening due to the big interest rate hike that happened in March of this year. That's because even though April's home price figures show that prices have increased from the previous month, they don't fully account for the recent rise in rates, because home buyers who closed on their purchase in April likely secured lower mortgage rates from before the interest rate hike, since buyers can lock in interest rates from up to 60 days before. We'll likely only see what effect March's interest rate hike had when we get May and June's housing data. The second reason why house prices might come down this year is the possibility of a recession. Many prominent economists and bankers believe that the US is likely to go into a recession later this year. If this happens, unemployment will increase, people will cut back on spending, and overall, less people will be in the market for a home, which will have a negative impact on house prices. And the last reason for lower house prices is that more housing supply is on the way. More houses are expected to hit the market later this year, at a time when demand is potentially dropping. So overall, there are some good arguments for house prices continuing to increase this year, and also some good arguments for prices starting to flatten out or even come down. No one can predict exactly how these supply and demand forces will play out, and there are other factors that we can't predict with certainty. For example, we don't know to what extent the Fed will continue to raise rates in the future, which will really impact house prices. The Fed might raise interest rates even more this year, causing house price appreciation to come to a halt, but then they might later decide to lower the rates back down again if they think the economy is suffering too much. So even housing market experts can't predict what's going to happen to the housing market this year. But if you're curious about what the experts' general consensus is, according to a recent Zillow Home Price Expectations survey, experts on average predict that the house price growth in 2022 will be 9%. So they believe that homes will continue to go up in value this year, and that we won't experience a real estate crash. My own prediction is that house prices will continue to rise, but not as fast as they have in the last 2 years. At worst, I think home values could level off or dip slightly, but I don't foresee a major housing crash this year. And that's because housing supply is just too low still, and there are not enough homes being built right now to keep up with demand. And once again, I could be wrong. If we experience a large recession this year, my prediction could change. It's going to be interesting to see how things turn out. But if you're wondering if you should buy a house this year, here's some advice I have that will guarantee that you don't lose out in the long term and will minimize the impact any housing market crash will have on your finances. If you're planning on buying a home this year, make sure you plan to live in your home for at least 5 to 7 years. This is for 2 reasons. Firstly, if the housing market does start to decline this year, luckily for you, house prices have historically always recovered. Even after the 2008 housing crisis, where home values saw an average decline of 33%, they still recovered after some time and are now far more expensive than they were at the peak of the housing bubble in 2006. So this way, even if the housing market crashes, if you simply don't sell your home, you won't lose any money in the long term as the price of your home will recover. Another reason why you need to plan to own your home in the long term is because buying and selling real estate is expensive. You have to pay expensive loan fees when you buy a home and pay even more expensive selling commissions when you sell a home. Therefore, in order to make buying a home worth it, you need to spread out these transaction costs over a long period of time. If you plan on living in a house for only a few years, it usually makes more financial sense to rent instead of own. Another piece of advice I have for you if you're debating buying a home this year is to budget conservatively. If it's a stretch financially to purchase your home this year, you should probably hold off, because it is a risky and uncertain time to buy. For example, if you're a couple that makes a dual income and you're trying to buy your first home, make sure you can support living in your home on just a single salary. Don't buy a house if it means that you both have to be working forever to afford your home. That way, if we do experience a recession this year and one of you loses your job, you won't have to sell your house at a loss because you can no longer afford your expensive housing payment. It's also important that you budget for your housing payment accurately. There are so many costs that go into your overall housing payment that many people don't account for. In addition to your mortgage cost, you need to account for property taxes, homeowners insurance, potential HOA fees, repair and maintenance costs, and utilities. It's surprising how much these can add up to. My monthly mortgage cost is only $1,050. But after adding in all the other expenses, I pay $1,756 a month. And that's before any repair costs or utilities. All in all, I'm probably paying over $2,000 a month on average for my home, which is around double the cost of my mortgage. So please make sure that you budget accurately so that you don't resent the house you live in that's draining away all of your savings. And if you follow these 2 tips of planning to live in your home long term and budgeting appropriately, even in the event that we do experience a recession or real estate downturn, you'll be okay financially. But those are my thoughts on buying a home in 2022. Let me know if you agree or disagree down in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for plenty more content. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care.